So for our next speaker, it is with great pleasure that I introduce Dr. Farrell. Dr. Farrell earned his bachelor's degree and master's degree in plant and soil science from the University of Kentucky in 1998 and 2000, and a PhD in weed science from University of Georgia in 2003. He joined the University of Florida as an assistant professor in 2004 with responsibilities in weed management and herbicide stewardship. In the time since, he has attained the rank of associate professor in 2009 and professor 2014. Dr. Farrell became the director of the University of Florida's Center for Aquatic and Invasive Plants in 2017, where he helps coordinate and promote invasive plant research and extension activities throughout the UF Institute of Food and Agriculture Sciences. In 2019, he took leadership of the IFAS Pesticide Information Office, which directs pesticide licensing and testing and extension outreach activities for pesticide safety and compliance. Dr. Farrell has chaired or co-chaired 22 graduate students and published over 100 referred journal articles in his career. He currently serves as editor of the Journal of Aquatic Plant Management and sits on the board of directors of the Aquatic Plant Management Society. Today, Dr. Farrell will be presenting a talk on understanding the glyphosate controversy. Take it away, Dr. Farrell.
Thank you, Emily. I wish I would have sent you a much shorter bio. That was too much for anybody to have to endure. But thank you, Northeast APMS. I appreciate the opportunity and the invite to be here with you today, and I appreciate the topic. I believe it's very important. So what we're going to be talking about today is glyphosate and the controversy that surrounds it, and I believe this is still a timely and helpful topic. For some reason, my webcam isn't picking up, but as long as you can hear me and see my slides, I think we're just going to go with it. So all right, so what's the deal? What's going on with glyphosate? And so let's just sort of set the stage here. I think we're all aware that glyphosate is the active ingredient in Roundup and the whole suite of different named herbicides. We use them exclusively and extensively in lots of different areas. And the reason for that is it is a very flexible and extremely helpful material. So some people would say it's kind of a 1 in a million or a 1 in a billion type herbicide, and I would say that it's probably a once and forever herbicide. I don't know that we'll ever have anything that is as flexible and as useful as glyphosate ever again. There's a lot of reasons for this flexibility and why it is used everywhere from cornfields to cattails in aquatic situations to crack and crevice weed control in sidewalks. And here is just a small list. It's non-volatile, it doesn't have an odor, it's non-staining, it's highly effective, it's inexpensive, it's just always there doing the work that you need it to do. But when you look at the amount of glyphosate that's being used in the country, and this is just ag use, by the way, this doesn't include natural area use, but ag use by far dominates the market. When you look at it, it has just steadily climbed. You know, it was fairly low in the early 90s, but we are now up to 250 million pounds every year being applied. And these are 2014 numbers. I'm assuming that we're even beyond that now. So this product is going out on thousands and thousands of acres, multiple applications a year in some scenarios. And even though I would think most all of us who are plant managers would sit here and say, yeah, we've used glyphosate for a long time. We're comfortable with it. We know it's not one to be afraid of. We still have to sit back as responsible citizens and say, anything that we're using at 250 million pounds a year, we need to be really critical and scientific in our thinking and ask ourselves a real question. And we don't need to be afraid of questions like this. But the question I ask myself and others is, we rely on it. It's a huge part of a lot of programs, but are we killing ourselves in the process? So we have got to, as scientists, grapple with this question, have in our mind where we stand on it, and not just rely on what we have been taught by others or what we have been told by others, that glyphosate has a completely clean tox package and there's never any reason to ever be concerned. So what I want to do in this presentation today is address this question, and I want to go through the data with you, and I want you to draw your own conclusion by the time we get to the end about where you personally stand with respect to glyphosate and your use of that material. So I think it's important that I don't believe that we need to start all the way back in 1970 with the patent or the 1976 labeling of the material as a herbicide. But everything changed in March of 2015 with the World Health Organization's ruling. So this is when everything became different. And there are times in your life where you remember where you are or where you were when certain things occurred, like, where were you when the O.J. Simpson verdict was read and those types of things. But I actually remember where I was when I read this article because it shocked me that the World Health Organization, one of the most reputable organizations in the world, had come out and elevated glyphosate to a class 2A probable carcinogen. I said, boy, this changes things, and we need to be, I have got to put away what I have been taught, and I got to get into the data and find out why did they make this ruling. So let's get into it. So what happened? Well, on March of 2015, it was the IARC that reclassified glyphosate. All right. And that's an important thing that we need to keep in our mind. It was the IARC that did this. So who are they and what do they do? Well, the IARC is the International Agency for Research on Cancer. And this is a branch within the World Health Organization. And not only are they a branch, they're a very insulated branch and almost totally autonomous. They don't seem to really answer to the World Health Organization. But what their role and purpose is to conduct and coordinate research into the causes of cancer. So what they do is they look for groupings, and it's usually within occupational guidelines. So for example, they'll do a huge national or international survey of people that work for a dry cleaners, for example. And they go and they start looking within those populations of individuals that work for the dry cleaner. Is there an elevated cause of cancer? Is there an elevated likelihood of cancer within this population that is higher than the normal rest of the world? Because if there is, there may be a chemical or something that they are interacting with in their job that could be causing cancer. Then they try to identify that. So it's a very noble role that the IARC plays, and that's how they work. So it was the IARC that started looking at glyphosate and groups of managers and glyphosate users, and they believed that there was a risk here. So they elevated it to, as I indicated earlier, to a class 2A probable carcinogen. But now we need to ask, what is a probable carcinogen? What does that even mean? Well, we need to understand that probable doesn't mean likely, all right? What they mean by a probable carcinogen means that there is limited evidence of carcinogenicity in humans and sufficient evidence in experimental animals. This is a critical point, and I want everybody to make sure that you get this. No one in the world is saying or claiming that glyphosate causes cancer in humans. There is simply not enough evidence to make that claim. All the IARC is saying is that there is sufficient evidence that it causes cancer in rats and mice models and in laboratory experiments. If there was sufficient evidence that it causes cancer in humans, then it would be a class 1 known carcinogen. So make sure you are aware, no one in the world, even the IARC, no one in the world says that it causes cancer in humans. The data don't support that. However, even with them saying that there is sufficient evidence for cancer in experimental animals, other similar organizations and agencies across the world have vociferously disagreed with that classification. The EPA twice has rerun their analysis and said, we see no linkage between glyphosate and cancer. The European Food Safety Authority, which is the European Union, they published a very comprehensive review that says they don't find that it causes cancer. And they say, and I quote, EFSA concluded that glyphosate is unlikely to pose a carcinogenic hazard to humans. Okay, so there is no linkage to humans at all. But not only was it EPA and EFSA, Health Canada, South Korea, Australia, France, Germany, Switzerland, Brazil, Japan, and New Zealand have all independently, with the same data sets, made a conclusion that there is no linkage between glyphosate and cancer. So what's the deal? What's going on? Why is IARC on one side and refusing to change their position, and the rest of the world is on the other side? What's going on? Well, the primary reason for this is how the evaluations were conducted and what questions were being asked. And again, this is a very important thing to understand. IARC was assessing hazard. They were asking, is harm possible? Under any scenario, is it ever possible that glyphosate could be harmful? EPA and the rest of the world, they analyze risk. And basically their risk is hazard times exposure, right? So risk is asking, is harm likely? When you consider how risky that material is or how hazardous the material is, and then how much exposure we are expecting, we can then analyze how concerned we need to be. IARC is not considering use rates, exposure, environmental fate, or anything else. They're just asking, is it ever possible under any scenario? Now, when you analyze hazard, you are going to have a high hit rate. So here is an article from an investigative report done through Reuters. And what they found was the IARC, after over 40 years, they've assessed almost 1,000 molecules, and they've only found one that was probably not likely to cause cancer. Now, the reason for this is because when you are assessing hazard, almost everything gets put into that list, right? I mean, if you breathe pure oxygen, 100% oxygen for long enough, it can cause great damage to your body. So it's about both hazard, but also exposure. So that is why the fact that they weren't considering exposure is one of the things that elevated glyphosate in their analysis. Now, which way is right? Is it more appropriate to do risk or hazard? So what's the best way of doing it? I would say that there is no best way. Both are effective. Both are good ways of addressing this question. You just need to understand that hazard and risk are very different. And that is one of the primary reasons there is so much controversy between the rest of the world and IARC. But what is a probable carcinogen really? All right, we've already said that it by definition means that there's limited evidence that it causes cancer in humans, but sufficient evidence that it causes cancer in experimental animals. But what does that really mean? So what are some probable carcinogens? So let's start by looking at some known carcinogens. All right, this is a 2A known carcinogen. Alcoholic beverages. I didn't know that was on there, but it not only is it a known carcinogen, it's actually a pretty bad one. It's liver, mouth, tongue, throat, esophagus, stomach. There's a lot of cancers associated with alcoholic beverages, unfortunately. but asbestos, tobacco, sunlight. So all of these things are known carcinogens, and I think we would all nod in agreement that that these should be on the list. So let's look at some probable carcinogens. Well, the IARC says glyphosate should be here. None of the rest of the world agree, but IARC says it should. So what else is on the list? Well, worker exposure to hair care products. If you work in a salon, there's things in there that they've said are probable carcinogens. Consumption of red meat is a probable carcinogen, as well as consuming beverages heated to greater than 165 degrees. Now, this does not say consumption of coffee. It says consumption of any hot beverage. These are probable carcinogens. Now, I'm not showing you this so that you shake your head and go, oh, what a bunch of hooey. I drink coffee every day. I eat red meat commonly. If glyphosate's on the same list as them, then why am I even wearing PPE? That's not why this is here. Every pesticide must be used properly and in accordance with the label. And if any manager hearing this presentation does not feel that way, then that's a real black mark, not only on our industry, but on your organization in particular. But the reason I'm showing these things is so you can have a context. What is a probable carcinogen? We're hearing a lot, glyphosate causes cancer. First off, that is not true. No one in the world is saying that. And number two, this is the list that glyphosate stacks up against if it is actually even a type 2A probable carcinogen.
5 minutes.
Well, with all of this, California's Office of Environmental Health Assessment, they have adopted the position that glyphosate is a carcinogen. They've listed it here. And what this office is basically California's own EPA, and they have quite a bit of authority within the state of California. Well, if they classify it as a carcinogen, then it falls under Proposition 65. And that means that there have to be warning labels. If you ever go to California, as John Madsen can clearly attest, you are going to see these Proposition 65 warning labels all over the place. You see them in airports, you see them at Disney, and boy, there's a Prop 65 warning label on just about everything in that state. All right. So California was moving to add warning labels to glyphosate. However, in February of 18, a court stepped in and blocked it. It was a California court. And this was the ruling from Judge William Shub when he blocked allowing glyphosate to fall under Prop 65. And this is what he said in his opinion: that a cancer warning would be misleading at best, considering that a reasonable consumer would not understand that a substance is known to cause cancer when only one health organization found that, and virtually all other government agencies have found no evidence of cancer. What Judge Shub is saying is just because the IARC said it doesn't make it so. All right? You have to look at the preponderance of evidence and the fact that every other organization in the world says it doesn't cause cancer. You can't just default and cherry pick and go with IARC and ignore the other. So based on that, Judge Shub blocked it and said Prop 65 does not fit in this scenario. However, it came back up again, and then EPA in August of 19 issued a very strong statement saying that it would actually, if you put warning labels on a product like this, that it would actually constitute false labeling and that it will not be allowed. No state was allowed that level of jurisdiction over pesticides. So EPA put their hand down very, very strong on this issue. And then again, it kept flipping through the courts. Again, in June of 2020, it came up again and it was struck down for a second time in a second California court that you cannot put warning labels. So when people say glyphosate causes cancer, the California courts have shown there is not sufficient evidence for it to come under the jurisdiction of Prop 65. But then how does that square with the fact that Monsanto Bayer have been sued and they have lost cases in California, and juries have awarded these exceedingly large settlements up to $2 billion in one situation? So how can one court in California say that glyphosate was responsible for cancer, and another court say that it doesn't even fall under the jurisdiction of Prop 65 because there's no evidence of carcinogenicity? Well, that is a huge issue. That is a big legal argument that I am simply not skilled enough to break apart. But what I have read about the proceedings of the court cases where the plaintiffs were awarded large settlements, they said that the juries were strongly swayed by a discussion of the Monsanto papers. All right. The Monsanto papers were basically these internal Monsanto memos that indicated Monsanto employees were ghostwriting these articles and were basically being very devious, and they were bringing up concerns like big tobacco. Remember how big tobacco knew for years that tobacco caused cancer, and they continued to brush it under the rug. They said Monsanto has done the same thing. Well, when that occurred, EPA, when the Monsanto papers became public information, the EPA and EFSA said, hey, stop everything. If there is a cover up here, if there is impropriety, we want to know. So the EFSA in particular had all the Monsanto papers shipped to them. They did a full investigation, and this is their report. In their report, they said, EFSA can confirm that even if the allegations regarding ghostwriting were true, there would be no impact on the overall assessment presented by EFSA. The reason for that is that there are only 2 papers out of over 700 that would actually fall under suspicion from ghostwriting. So even if you take those 2 papers out, the ruling by the EFSA still stands that there is not sufficient evidence that glyphosate is a carcinogen. All right, so basically the EFSA and
Okay,
the
Dr. Farrell, you might want to start wrapping up. Any last few comments?
I'm real close.
Okay.
What they're saying is not only is there no fire, there's not even any smoke. All right. However, Bayer went ahead and settled, paid out $11 billion. So why did they do it? Is this a show of guilt? Maybe. You can decide if you think that's a showing of guilt. Others would say they were just trying to expedite the 95,000 cases that were waiting and pending in court, and they were just trying to put it behind them and move on. So where does this leave us? Well, it leaves us with the fact that glyphosate is still registered by the EPA and the states, meaning it is fully legal to purchase and apply. However, many municipalities have already banned it. So should you continue to use glyphosate in your operations? And I'll say that it's a legal option, right? It is still registered by the EPA, but depending on where you are and who you're working with, you need to use wisdom and judgment. I think you have to ask yourself, is the juice worth the squeeze? Yes, you can use it, but is the PR issue surrounding it going to be such that it's not worth it in the end? And that is going to be a situation by situation deal that you have to face as a company or as a state agency using this material. So I hope this helps clarify a little bit, and I'm happy to take a question if there are any.